Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple. Coming to us from the world of critical crafting, now currently developing the campaign setting for 5e, The Mage's War, a game of magic versus machines. The one and only Dillon Olney. How you doing today, man?
I am doing good, man. If I would have known it was a temple of drunkenness, I would have had a few more drinks before this.
We can always catch up. But I suppose the tradition would be to open with the humble beginnings, in a sense. So, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Oh man. So I started playing. I got the Black Dragon box back in, I don't even remember the year. I was roughly like 12 or 13 years old. My grandparents had given me and my brother some money when they were visiting, and we didn't really get a lot of like, hey, go spend, on whatever. So I convinced my brother to go in with me on this box, because I just thought, I thought the minis looked cool. I thought the like concept was cool, and we started playing it, and I loved it. Like immediately, it was D&D 3.5. And I absolutely adored it. And honestly, if 5e wasn't so popular, I'd probably still be playing 3.5 because it is my favorite system. But yeah, so we started playing it. Me and my brother started playing it, and back then, like, it wasn't really as culturally accepted as it is now to be playing role-playing games or D&D or whatever. So it was literally just us. So it was me coming up with the maps and the encounters and all this, and then like I'd play a character, and he'd play a character, and I'd also be the DM because we didn't have anyone else that we could play with, and we couldn't really talk to anyone else about it either.
I can certainly get that vibe. I think I had a bit of an easier time because I knew how to bait and switch people at times. I'll put it that way. Or just the fact that it's very easy to be persuasive when you're taller than everyone else.
There you go. No, I didn't have that advantage. We played that for quite a while, and then let's see, probably around, through high school. So like middle school, we played it quite a bit. High school, I kind of fell out of it. And then college, actually, I jumped back into it again because there was somebody, like a friend of a roommate or whatever that was into it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I loved this as a kid. Let's play it again. And we started playing, and then let's see. So then after that, after I was married and I came back to Indiana, my brother was like, dude, we need to start playing again. And I was like, well, I don't know. It's kind of a lot of work to like set everything up and all this. I was like, all right, we'll give it a go. And I was watching like DM Scotty doing crafting videos and this kind of thing. And so I started making stuff like building terrain and all this, whatever. And one thing kind of led to another, where I was posting all the stuff that I was creating and painting and all this online. And Danny from Lost Adventures Company reached out to me. He was like, hey, man, like we kind of became friends. And he was like, hey, like I'm working on a Kickstarter. I would love you to be a creative director. And at the time, I had just graduated from college a couple years prior with a sculpture degree. And what do you do with that? Well, I was working in insurance. So, of course, I jumped at the opportunity to work with someone on something creative. And with him, I worked as a creative director on several different Kickstarters. And then when his company kind of took another direction, I worked with Arcade Minis for a while as creative director. And then at one point I was like, you know what? Like, I've been doing all of this, writing and art direction and formatting and this for other people for so long. I just want to do it for me. And so at that point, I took my YouTube channel, which was Critical Crafting, that had been focused on crafting videos, and I kind of converted the brand over to creating 5e product, 3D sculpts, all that kind of stuff, and doing it for myself back in 2021. So it was a very interesting, humble beginnings to where we are now. It was not a clear path by any means.
Mm-hmm. Well, these kind of things rarely are clear. Just from the experiences I've had with doing this show for as long as I have.
Yeah, I've had a lot of writers and aspiring creative directors, and I ask like, hey, what do I need to do, to become a creative director, to run my own business, making content or whatever full time. And I'm like, honestly, like I'll give you the best advice I have, but at the same time, everyone I know who's doing that in the industry has a different story on how we got here, and none of them are what you would expect.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that in mind, since you mentioned doing a lot of this kind of stuff yourself, was the Mage's War something that has its roots in the campaigns that you were doing in the past, or are its origins a little bit more recent?
Sure. So the Mage's War is 100% rooted in our home game, actually. So it's a bit of a funny story because when we first started playing again, so my youngest brother was the one who's like, hey, I really want to play D&D again. But we needed people to come and play. And so I invited one of my friends over who had been a longtime friend from high school. But it was interesting because he hated magic. Like, he did not like high magic settings. He despised spellcasting. He thought, mages were completely unbalanced, which, to be fair, in 3.5 and most editions they are. But I love him anyway. So I don't want to say placate him, but it is what that was I said, okay, I'm going to introduce this faction that, into our home game that hates magic. And instead of using magic, they're going to be high tech. So in order to be, able to combat someone who can stop time and cast fireball and whatever, they're going to have much more advanced technology than everyone else. They're going to have firearms and laser guns and power armor and chain swords and all this stuff. And so I introduced that, and I offered the party basically a choice of, hey, if you want, you can join this faction that is all about high tech, and we can run a campaign where you're using power armor and laser swords and robot armor and all this stuff. Or you can choose magic. And the majority of the party picked magic, and so of course what we call the Order of the Blank became the enemy in the home game. But it kind of grew from there because I had to build, enemies that were part of this faction and equipment that was part of this faction. And so the Mages War kind of grew out of our home game, just like the majority of our content originally did, where we said, all right, let's take the stuff that we've been playing in our home game, convert it into a more professional format, and then present it for other people to enjoy as well.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly get that. And given the magic and technology dichotomy within the game, I am curious what would be the inspirational media list for the Mage's War, something that's often referred to as Appendix N.
So, like what I would consider like a mood board kind of a deal.
That's one way of looking at it. It's just not on a board. It is basically going through what sort of media inspired the concept, whether it be video games, whether it be film, whether it be TV, whether it be comic books, whether it be other TTRPGs, everything's on the
Sure.
table.
Yeah. So like, this is one of those things that is an interesting concept because we all take inspiration from all kinds of different places. For me, initially, the Order of the Blank just started from, again, this idea of we got to introduce firearms and high tech into this campaign. How do we do that organically? From there, I started looking at other inspirational sources. So, Arcane from the League of Legends TV show was amazing, and that was a big inspiration for some of it. Some grimdark settings, Warhammer has some things in there that we really liked. Fallout 3 had some things that we really liked. So, if you're sitting there going, okay, I need power armor, I need chainsaw blades, like Fallout's got it, Warhammer's got it. Like looking at those as resources and going, okay, here's a cool thing. How do we introduce that in a 5e setting in a way that hasn't been done before? And some of it too was, going to conventions and they'd have like paint and take, and I'm an avid painter. And they, the only minis they would have were like a Warhammer, either a Space Marine, or it could be some random no-name miniature line with some guy with a gun. And I was like, well, how am I going to use this in my 5e campaign? And so developing the Mage's War and the Order of the Blank allowed me to use the minis that I was painting in speed painting contests, or to use proxies from other systems, or take, HeroClix miniatures and use them in my game. Because I had all these things from, role-playing games and other miniature games for years that I was like, well, I can't use them in D&D because I don't have stats for them, or I don't have, a setting that a high-tech robot fits. And when I kind of sat down and I had all these things in front of me, I was like, well, why not? Like, I could make a system or a faction that would utilize this kind of stuff. And it allowed us to use a lot of the minis that I'd been collecting for a long time, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely see that, and I think that's the reason why you see so many minis that are multi-purpose or just generic in that sense. One particular game I was going to ask if you were familiar with was Arcanum.
So I'm not, and this is funny because like we have a faction called the Arcanum with 2 U's, and I have never heard of the game Arcanum before until people started commenting on some of our posts, like, hey, here's our Arcanum Insurrectionist. And they're like, oh, from Arcanum. And we're like, no, I don't know what that is.
Yeah. Now with that, the big reason I say that is that game very much has a theme of technology versus magic, and the fact that diving too far into one or the other can cut off some potential pathways. The big reason for that is technology requires things to work a certain way all day, every day, whereas magic does whatever the hell it wants. So introducing such a chaotic element into, say, a train could cause some problems if that train were to go off the rails. So if you have too much magic on you, you could be forced to sit at the back of the train, or you could be forced to not get on the train at all.
Gotcha. So it is funny. There's as a creative person, I always like to think that there's a lot of different creative people out there, and sometimes we have similar ideas, which sounds like we had a pretty similar idea here. Our big thing with the Blank versus the Arcanum that we really wanted to push was, yes, the dichotomy of science and magic, but we also kind of wanted to push a sort of tyrannical, I guess, way of viewing things. So, like the blank, if you are a magic user, even if you're a kid casting a cantrip or you're doing like a little quick spell, like to them, that is a recipe for death because magic will always lead to corruption in their minds because they've gone through a devastating war. They've seen what horrors magic can do firsthand, and their whole idea is put it down where it starts. Nip it in the bud, kind of a deal. So to use the train analogy, if there was a train and you're like, hey, I'm a magic user, and the blank are the people running the train, you're dead. Like they're going to kill you or ship you off to somewhere to research you or whatever. The Arcanum, then, in our setting, is a very sort of secret society. Some would call them rebels or even terrorists, where their whole purpose is, hey, people should be free to practice magic. They should not be subjugated by these rules that, force you to use technology or whatever. And if there's a commander who's standing in a city street of the Word of the Blank with men, women, and children around them, I don't care. I did not ask how big the marketplace was. I said I cast Fireball because I want to take that guy out, kind of a deal. Mm-hmm. So the idea more was setting up two different sides of kind of the same coin, where both of them are fighting for what they really believe is the right way to do things. And one is, hey, we need to extinguish magic. We need to use science and law and, forgo gods, forgo religion, get rid of any superstition. Like, here is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the other side of that coin being, hey, we need to express magic in the most insane way we possibly can, develop epic spells, dive into ancient lore, dive into things that might be dangerous because we believe that we all should be free to practice what we want to do, kind of a deal. And so that's kind of where our factions came from. And it's always interesting when I hear about other content, like you're saying Arcanum, which I'm like, man, we were really close there because we got similar names. That has done similar things, but I think that we have a unique viewpoint or twist or way of doing it that people really enjoy in their games.
Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, getting to the Mages War, obviously one of the big things is that there are 3 new races that are being introduced. What would those 3 races be, and what are they bringing to the table?
Sure. So it's been the fun part about the Mages War is, unlike a lot of other Kickstarters, we're actually like, I don't want to call it done, but it basically is. Like, I have the book in my hands. We've got a few things to add. We've got some editing.
You made that GIF thing that had it.
Yes. So, and I was showing it off at Origins and that. With that said, it has been a long time since I or a member of the team has written and reviewed some of the races. So I will try and do my best to recall what each of them does. So the Neolites are a race that is developed essentially by the Order of the Blank. And what they are is, you kind of start with a regular race, elf or orc or whatever, or lineage, and they strip that away. They take away all of your base traits, everything, and all of your memory, and basically everything you've ever been. And then they create you again as a Neolite, which is this sort of blank slate, hyper-intelligent being that's been created by the Order of the Blank. So the fun thing about that is, roleplay-wise, you could be like, well, I used to be, an elf lord or whatever, but now I've been stripped down to this thing, kind of a deal. And honestly, it's one of my, I really want to play it. one reason because their intelligence score can go above 20, which I know is blasphemous, but whatever. I thought it was super cool. And they have a lot of just really interesting things that allow them to be this kind of hyper intelligent. What's one of them? One of their features, I think, is like photographic memory, where they remember literally everything. So, like, after they're created, before their creation, they don't remember any of their past life. But once they're created, they remember every single thing that happened since then, which I think is a really fun roleplay element that could be used either for really good stuff or it could be really, really bad because you're going to remember every time anyone did anything bad to you. So that is, for me, I really like that race. The other one is the Soma, which is essentially a mechanical race. You could call it a proxy for like a Warforged. The big thing is that they have a crystal that holds the soul of the person inside of it. And so the lore for this was that people who were afraid of death would put their soul into a crystal that then would be placed inside of this mechanical body, and then they could operate this mechanical body. And if the mechanical body is destroyed, that soul crystal, so let's say you're a player character and you die, well, if somebody keeps that crystal, they can buy a new mechanical Soma body and put that crystal into it, and now you're alive again. But if the crystal is destroyed, like, you are done forever. There's no more true resurrection. There's no wish spell for you. You're wrecked. That's it. You're gone. Mm-hmm. So it was a fun way to like express a fear of death, and then also both a magical and kind of mechanical aspect to it. The third one is, again, one of my favorites. It's the Edenite race. And they're actually what my player character in our home campaign is. They're a race of humans that during what we call the First Mages War fled beneath the surface to the dark below, which is sort of our Underdark setting. If you're running a common, WotC campaign, you can easily replace it with your Underdark. But they fled there, and then they essentially created a city where they erase memory when you leave it of the location. So they're protecting themselves from all of the technocrats and this sort of a thing. Down in this city, they've got an artificial sun. They're the first people to develop epic level spells, which are spells beyond 9th level. They're a hyper magical race with all kinds of magical abilities. And I, as a spellcaster, absolutely love them. And we've got additional content for them. So there's some content for their race in the Mages War. There's additional content for their city and the surrounding environments in our Eden Expedition release and the Dark Below release on Patreon. So one of the things that we have tried very hard to do is interlink everything that we release, and at the same time allow for it to stand on its own. So if you want to just run it in your home game, there's ways to do that. If you're like, hey, I love the critical crafting setting and I want more, then there's 1,700 pages on Patreon that you can get that allow you to run that as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that said, when it comes to the subclasses you've got 3 new subclasses. What can you tell me about their particular playstyles?
So let me think. We've got the Paladin Oath of Anti-Magic is probably the most important of them, essentially because we introduced an entirely new system called warps or warping. And the idea being, okay, we got anti-spellcasters, but we want to be able to make subclasses for them for spellcasting classes. How do we go about doing that? And we didn't want to completely overhaul the spellcasting system because nobody wants more complications in the game anyway. Mm-hmm. So what we did was we came up with a few ways that we could tweak the spellcasting system while calling it basically an anti-magic system. And the anti-magic paladin, or the paladin anti-mage, uses that system where they're able to create warps, most of which are either anti-magic, directed specifically at screwing over your spellcasters because they're always running around casting polymorph and animate objects and ruining everything. Anyway, so so they have that. They also, I can't remember if they're dealing additional damage or not. There's been so many. We've made so much. It's difficult to remember what thing does what at this point. But their big thing is that they utilize warps, and they are specifically targeted at dealing additional damage or destroying spellcasters. On the flip side to that, we have the Arcanum Mage, which their whole deal is hiding that they're casting spells. So they can essentially cast spells without components a lot of the time, or hiding their components, and destroy things with nobody knowing what's going on, kind of a deal. So, you walk into a room, you say nothing, you got your hands behind your back, and suddenly fireball erupts in the room. It was you, but nobody knows, because there was no components at all that were used in it. And that's kind of their big thing. On top of using what we call a glyph sign, which is a way for them to communicate by carving sort of arcane runes into surfaces that only the Arcanum can see. So if you're not a member of that subclass, you can't see it, but everyone who is able to easily translate it. The third one, I believe, is the Paladin Oath of Secrecy, and those are basically spell-casting paladins who are dedicated to the Arcanum, trying to protect them from the blank, and so a lot of their stuff has to deal with hiding spell-casting, protecting mages, and protecting other people from harm.
Yeah. Now, one of the introductions is grafts, which is meant to be a body augmentation thing. How would it be similar, and how would be different from cybernetics in the usual sense?
So the fun thing is, it doesn't necessarily have to be cybernetics. We've actually developed where some grafts are just mundane items you can buy, and some are magical in nature. So, for instance, like this month, we just released a fossilized arm graft, which is a magical arm graft that allows you to use the Flesh to Stone spell as a touch kind of action, and then it's also got some other fun stuff involved with it, but it's magical. So, like, grafts can be cybernetic, or you're replacing your eye with a lich's eye, or you're replacing your arm with a ghost arm. And the reason we did that was because we wanted one for each side, both the Arcanum and the blank, to have options for grafts. And the other one was, we looked at 5e and we said, well, there's a lot of, like, let's say you're reaching higher levels. You're not doing anything with gold anymore. You're getting magic items, and that's about it, right? And so we said, okay, well, if you're getting, I killed this red dragon and I got 50,000 gold pieces. And it's like, great, what do I do with that? There's nothing really to do with that other than buy a bunch of mundane stuff that I don't need. Our solution was, hey, here's some really expensive grafts that you could say, I'm going to replace my arm with a arm cannon, or I'm going to put jets in my feet so I can fly, or whatever. And it allowed for much more expensive items with a set purchase point, which, Xanathar's guide introduced some purchase options for magical items, which is great, and I love it. But we put it directly into the grafting system of saying, hey, here's a magic one if you want to do that. Here's a mundane one if you don't want to just spend the money. And the other thing we did with them is you can't just get them outright. So, like, if you want to put a magical tattoo on, you can't just be like, hey, I got the magical tattoo graft and boop, I'm done. Someone has to make a check to apply the graft to you. And if it fails, then you lose either part of the money of the graft, that you then have to expend additional money, gold pieces to apply again, or it causes some kind of or it causes some kind of an issue. So, for instance, like the petrified arm or fossilized arm one, your arm could become permanently fossilized if the person does not succeed in an Arcana check to apply the graft. And the same applies for our mundane stuff, where if you're trying to replace your arm with like a robot arm, it's a medicine check, which we're finally using medicine checks for something. And if they fail on that, you could have a negative effect as well. So there's a lot of like nuances to the grafting system, and we've developed a lot of new. So we've got templates, grafts, sigils, deficiencies. There's a lot of new stuff.
Yeah. Now, you describe warps as the antithesis of magic. Is this something that'd be used by the blanks, or is it something that is meant to be a magic equivalent, but not technically magic?
So yes, honestly. So it is only used by members of the blank or people that have access to the Arcanile Infusion feat, which is a new sort of thing that we introduced. The idea was that we wanted to introduce a new faction with a new system that was built on an older one, so it didn't require a lot of extra rework or confusion for people. With that in mind, we had to kind of build it slowly. So warps are accessible to people in the blank. They're also accessible if you're like, hey, I want to use warps. You can take various feats or other functions that we've provided to be like, okay, give up spellcasting, or all right, you don't have to completely give up spellcasting, but you can take this feat and you get access to this many warps to create or whatnot. So the idea was that thematically they are the antithesis. Tongue twister. The antithesis of spells. But mechanically, they function very much like spells do to avoid any kind of confusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. Otherwise, you'd probably have people calling them out, going, "Wait, you're against magic, but you're using this." Which,
yes, yeah,
and to be fair, it is a lovely hypocrisy. Much like, say, the whole all magic is chaos magic, technically in Warhammer Fantasy.
Yes. So, and that's something that when we made it, we were like, we know there's going to be someone who's like, okay, so it's magic, but it's not called magic. And we're like, yes, like you are correct, but like, isn't that just science in this setting? But there are some interesting differences in like no warps use verbal components because there's not a reason to. And I'm almost sure every warp requires a material component. So, if you're doing science, you're not going to say, oobala goobala, alakazam, and move your fingers around and something's going to happen. You're going to have to be using some kind of a mechanical device, which is the material component, and then potentially doing some sort of a somatic component where you're moving something in a certain way. So the vast majority of warps require additional material components or whatnot. And in that regard, then, a lot of our subclasses that use warps get access to a great deal more castings, or I should call them creations, because that's what we call them for warps, per day than a spellcaster. And the reason that we did that was, one, normally it's going to require a material component, and two, there will never be, we are one company that is making warps. There will never be more warps than there are third-party spells in the universe. And so we wanted to say, all right, you're going to be limited. I don't know who your GM is, but you're going to be limited to just these warps instead of whatever spells. So you're going to get more castings with less options, essentially, was the initial idea for that.
Yeah. Now, speaking of casting, within the Kickstarter, you talk about having 9 epic casting spells. Beyond the fact that these are meant to be spells that are higher than ninth level, what can you tell me about how epic casting works compared to, well, casting?
Sure. So epic casting normally is going to require a lot more from the caster or casters. So a lot of it will be, hey, instead of one caster, you need 10. Instead of an action to cast this, you need a year. For a material component, you need 10,000 diamond skulls or whatever. They're all meant to be campaign plot point spells, essentially. And the fun thing is they can either be for your players or for your big bad evil guy. So, as a good example, we had one recently, and this isn't from the Kickstarter, but it's just the first one that comes to mind, which is Ice Age. And the idea is, hey, it's a druid spell. Basically, you freeze the world. Like, everything, we're talking Snowpiercer. I can't remember that old movie with Jake Gyllenhaal where everything freezes and everyone dies, but that's the idea.
The Day After Tomorrow.
Yes, The Day After Tomorrow, yes. That's the spell, right? But in order to do it, you have to obtain certain things. And so if you're saying, okay, I've got a character and this is their end goal, is they want to freeze this region or whatever. Okay, well now you got to go obtain, I think it's snow from each pole of the earth. And then you have to cast it for this many days and you have to expend this much stuff. So the idea is you got to go get all these things to do it, which for a player is like, okay, that could be a fun like end thing for my characters. That's their goal, is they're going to go get these things. But the fun part is it can also be, hey, we need to stop the bad guy from getting these things. So like this month's is, I can't remember the exact, it's prehistoric age, so it reverts everything back to like an intelligence level of like 3 or something. And also removes all technology from after the Stone Age. Mm-hmm. And you have to obtain 10 fossils of creatures that had died in that region or whatever. So if you got a bad guy, it could be, hey, he's obtained 8 of these fossils. You need to stop him from obtaining the last 2. Mm-hmm. And that's the general idea behind epic level spells is, hey, these are spells, and they range wildly. I mean, some of them are like, your campaign's done. Everyone is dead. Campaign over. Everyone petrified. Some of them are more, hey, you've created an artificial sun that can never be removed, kind of a deal. So there's a vast variety, but the idea behind them is that they are plot devices and campaign builders that your players can actually do, which I think is fun.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that in mind, you also had the concept of sigils, and would it be fair to say that sigils are a way to customize magic items to do more stuff than what they do by default?
That is 100% what they do. Not only do they augment magic items, but they can also augment mundane ones. So if you obtain a sigil and you want to apply it to your normal longsword, you can 100% do that. One of the fun things that I guess I'll give you as a secret is we actually have our own runic language that is all over all of our content and can be translated if you look at our sigils, and you can read some fun secret messages throughout our content if you do so. Mm-hmm.
I can certainly get that, and obviously one of the other things is deficiencies. Now you explained that it's basically you take a drawback in order to get a bonus feat slot. What would be a few examples of deficiencies and their deficiency, for lack of a better word?
Sure. So we developed deficiencies because nobody takes feats. Everybody wants their +2, so whatever score, and so they ignore the feats and move on. So we said, okay, what's a way that we can allow people to customize their characters and do it in a fun role-playing way. And the idea was deficiencies. So a good example, this is one I use, which I'm not sure if I'm 100% accurate on the exact function of it, but would be like aquaphobic was one that we added a while back. And it was something like, if you're within sight of water, you have disadvantage on attack rolls, or basically disadvantage on everything: skill checks, ability checks, attack rolls, etc. But because you take that, now you get a bonus feat that you can apply and say, cool, okay, I took that, now I'm going to take my, whatever, navigator feat or whatnot. So you take one thing that makes you worse and one thing that makes you better. And we also have variants where some of them are, you can only take deficiencies when you would normally take a feat. There's another variant where you can take them much more, which creates some very interesting characters. I had a player who was like a 12th level character, and he had a ridiculous number of feats and deficiencies that he figured they balanced each other out. So one thing with deficiencies is you definitely need your GM's permission. Another one would be, let's see, there's one that basically gave you long-term madness, and they almost always come with a negative to an ability score, so you get a -1 to, say, intelligence or wisdom, whatever. We've got, I'm trying to think of some of the more recent ones. I think it was Ossified Bones was one from this month where you had... you couldn't swim. Like, you do not get a swim speed. If you go in water, you sink. -2 to dex, and then like a -10 to your land speed or whatever. So there's a lot of fun negatives, and there's so many, at this point, we've been doing this so long, there's so many to choose from. But the big thing is, like any homebrew thing, you're going to want to talk to your DM, because there's some stuff where players are like, oh, I'm going to take the... Afraid of Fiends deficiency. And I'm like, we don't run those in this particular campaign, so that doesn't really count. So it is a good thing, as a DM, if you're like, hey, we're going to introduce this, talk to your players and make sure they're applying deficiencies that will actually affect them during the campaign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, what are you shooting for as far as a page count?
So we currently have 186 pages. With the additional stretch goals, I couldn't hazard a definite guess, but I would say we're probably, let me think, we added new locations, that's 2 there. I mean, I'd say 190, 200 easy. It's just difficult when we're like, hey, it's done, and we're going to add a little extra, and it's all going to depend on stretch goals. Like how, because we've done some that are encounter tables, we've done some that are extra art, and all of that is going to add page count. But I would guess within the 200-page range is probably a safe bet.
Yeah, for something of this scale, I could see that being around 200 pages. I am glad to see that one of the stretch goals that was met was custom sheets, because with some of the things that you have here, doing that in the stock character sheet would be not impossible, but certainly a bit tricky.
Yes, so that was one. I was on a call with our one of our graphic designers the other day, saying, "Hey, like, here's how warps work. Here's how epic level spells work. Here's each of the factions. We want to make these character sheets, to work for them." And I believe we've also added, I got to double check with our manufacturer, but to have those as perforated pages so they can be torn out or they can be scanned, and then, you can have multiples of them.
And I'm guessing those custom sheets will be on your guys' site as PDFs.
Yes. One of the big things is we try and produce as much as we can for sale digitally and physically. So yes, we will for sure be doing that, and I'm really excited about it, honestly, because having our own custom character sheets is awesome. It's not cheap; it's very expensive, but it's something that I think is very well worth it for the people that support us and like the content we're creating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get behind that. And what would you be shooting for as far as a release window? Not a hard date per se, but a ballpark.
Sure. So this is another very hard one because I've helped on enough Kickstarters to know every time you think you know when you think it's going to be delivered, you don't. With that said, and with the book being, like I said, basically done, the big hurdles now are we need to add the stretch goals, which some of them are writing stretch goals, which will take us a little bit of time. We're a very small team. We're essentially a team of me, Cameron DeFord, Connor DeFord, my wife Sarah, and then Caitlin Smith as an editor. Of that team, I'm the only full-time employee. Everybody else is part-time, royalty paid, etc. So adding anything, it becomes a time addition. On top of the Patreon and other projects that me or the rest of the team is working on. So with that said, we're going, okay, we're going to add the stretch goals. We're going to add the art. We're going to add STLs. The STL deadline, if I'm remembering correctly, the digital only 3D printable file deadline or projected delivery date is January of 2025. The book and VTT, which is another thing, is the VTT people have to do all the conversion. All of that we've put at July of 2025. Now, that said, I believe it will all be done much sooner, but because of my experience working with other people on Kickstarters, we have set essentially a year to say, hey, we know things are going to come up that are likely going to cause delays. And we know that, there's shipping stuff and all this that we're hopeful that we'll deliver before then. But we wanted to set that as kind of a safety net, I guess you'd call it, to say, hey, we would love to deliver before this, but this is what we think reasonably we can expect it to be delivered by at the latest. Now, I might, eat my hat
I hope
later.
I hope not. You can't eat anything bigger than your head.
Yeah, well, so I don't expect it to take longer than that. Like, we're already talking to people about production. I'm already working with editing on, hey, here's things we need to change, and here's formatting we need to shift, and all that fun stuff. But I've worked on enough projects to know, like, every time I think, oh, it's only going to take this long, and any Kickstarter you look at, it's only going to take that long, it normally takes a good deal longer. So we set our goal a ways out from where I honestly thought it would be, so that people wouldn't be angry, honestly, to say, hey, we delivered early, rather than, oh no, we delivered 6 months late. So so July 2025 is our hard. We really want to hit that date. We're really hopeful we'll hit before that for everything. But I don't want to set it in stone because stuff can go nuts.
Mm-hmm. So, with that in mind, I will certainly be keeping an eye out on how things develop with it. But I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Absolutely. It's been great being on here.
And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Time to start a little more hard than before.
And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!